Rillimat tervepä terve again. 6:45 in the morning, absolutely the best time of the day to do some Dynamics 365 plugin development. So I thought that I'll record a small video now, a short video about showing you how to avoid infinite loops in D365 plugins when triggering the plugin custom assembly from a workflow. So let's check the scenario first quickly. So I have a plugin and workflow that gets triggered from a customer asset entity in Dynamics 365. The entity type doesn't matter. This is a very generic example. Here in my scenario, this workflow gets triggered when the delivery date from factory field value is updated for the customer asset. So basically this whole scenario here is related to setting the warranty information of the customer asset. And the plugin itself, what it does is that it checks the delivery date from the factory and fetches the warranty length information from the product and then sets the warranty end date based on the product warranty length based on the certain logic. If we check the source code of the plugin here in Visual Studio, it's basically this here. So very simple plugin, which is using now here in the first place the entity that is passed to the plugin context. And so over here, I fetch that from the context input parameters. And then here is the logic for fetching the warranty length from the product and finally setting it to the warranty end date field of the customer asset based on a certain logic. And in the end of the code, I'll have two different scenarios for updating the customer asset. In the first place, where I'm purposely doing the infinite loop, I use the object fetched from the entity context, and that is using the update method of the SDK to update itself to CRM. So this is now already deployed to D365, so I'm ready to start demoing this, how it works. Before we do that, I'll mention shortly that in the plugin development, there is the tracing service that is very useful when plugin development is done, and especially for troubleshooting. So the tracing service gets initialized here, and then I can use the trace method of it to trace text or dynamic values. And those are actually saved into D365 to an entity called plugin trace logs. And I'm using here advanced find to find out and look for the plugin trace log records to see more information how the plugin execution is going. So we are ready to go. I'll go back to my customer asset here, and I've already set the delivery date earlier to be the 23rd of September. I'll change it now to be for example, yesterday, that was 27th of September. I'll save the changes. And after a couple of seconds, the workflow should get triggered. And now when I have the version of the plugin there, which purposely does the infinite loop, this should be triggered several times. I'll tell you that in a moment. Why is that? So we'll refresh the plugin, the workflow process session view, and as we can see at 6:49, the workflow got triggered for the first time, actually 6:48, and it's still ongoing. There are several process sessions already logged into this view here. Let's refresh that again. Still ongoing, 6:49. waiting for resources is the latest status. One more time, let's refresh it, and eventually it fails. And the failure here now, we can open the process session records to see it more detailed, and as we can see here, the error was related to infinite loop. You can see more details also here in this view below the error. So we got the infinite loop now reproduced, and why is that? Let's go back to the plugin trace logs. I'll refresh this advanced find query, and there are now several plugin trace logs entries created from my workflow execution. I'll open one of those, and towards the bottom of this view I can see that here is my custom tracing that I've done. For example, the first row says tracing service created successfully, and in my piece of source code here in this row I'll create a trace entry just to see that the tracing service got created successfully. So this is again very useful in terms of the troubleshooting. But here in this my custom tracing, I cannot see anything that why the infinite loop got created, but that can be viewed actually from the D365 pipeline tracing service record that is here. So I'll open it and go to the bottom, and there are quite a lot of tracing there actually, so I copy it over to a text file, and the important piece of information here is the input entity step. So here it shows that what were the actual field values that got passed to the plugin execution, and within there is the delivery date value that was actually used to trigger the workflow in the first place. I can show you that from the workflow here. So let's go back to the information section of the workflow, and it's the customer asset entity triggered when the delivery date, for example, the delivery date is updated. And the reason now for the infinite loop is that because that delivery date is included to the input entity for the plugin, and that is actually used for triggering the workflow in the first place. Then when I use the context entity here to update the entity back to CRM, then it goes over and over again to update also the delivery date to the customer asset, and then it triggers another execution of the workflow. So how to avoid that? I have another version of my update here, so I'll comment out the context entity update and used an object called retrieved CA, retrieved customer asset instead. And now what is that is actually here. I use the SDK retrieve method to retrieve that specific customer asset record from CRM and use the GUID of the customer asset to fetch the correct one. And in the column set, I specify only the columns, the fields that I need for my logic here in the plugin, and that does not include the delivery date value. So basically when I now set the guarantee end date for my retrieved CA object and use that to update it back to CRM, it does not include now the delivery date, which causes the infinite loop. So let's build this version of the plugin. It was built successfully. Then I used the plugin registration tool to update the new version to D365. Here is the set warranty dates, DLL build now 655. So I select that one and click update, and within a couple of seconds it should show me that it got updated successfully here. And then I go back to my D365 customer asset, change the delivery date to, for example, 26th, and save the changes. And let's go back to the workflow process sessions again and refresh. And here we can see 655 is the latest execution of the workflow, and it was successful. I refresh it a couple of more times just to make sure that there are no more executions for this workflow, and that's actually the way it is now. 655 is the only only time that it got executed. And let's check the plugin trace logs one more time. Now we refresh this one, and here we can see also that 655 was the only occurrence of the plugin execution now, instead of several times it was done before when I had the other version of my update code within the deployed to the D365. Now I actually forgot to delete these plugin trace records before I updated my plugin and run it again. Now I don't, there are so many pipeline tracing service records here that probably I cannot find the correct one to show you that within this time the delivery date information was not actually passed to the plugin. But when you do the plugin development, I have found it a good practice to delete these if you're in the dev environment, or then use date to sort down these records to see only the latest ones, and then check the pipelines tracing service to see that what data was actually passed to the plugin. But as we saw here in the workflow, it only got triggered once, so the delivery date was not part of the data that was passed back to the CRM when the update method was called here. So that's it. Hopefully you got a basic idea how to do the plugin development related to infinite loops, and how to avoid that by using the specific object entity from or entity object rather from the CRM, rather than using the one that is passed to the plugin context from the workflow, if you have similar scenario than here what I've shown. Thank you for watching, and have a great start of the day.